Well, what we know about the vaccination programme is this is a global problem and we need a global solution. And we're only going to be able to deal with this disease if we get everybody vaccinated across the world. So it's vital we work together. It's vital we keep borders open and we resist vaccine nationalism and we resist protectionism. And I've been working with my fellow trade ministers to make that happen. We're pleased that the EU admitted that the Article 16 invocation, which you talked about for the border in Ireland, was a mistake, and they are now not proceeding with that. But fundamentally, the way we're going to get through this crisis is working together. And I'm very pleased that the UK is leading the way. We've got the fantastic vaccine task force under Kate Bingham, which now has 7 vaccines on order, 367 million doses of those vaccines. And we know that that supply is secure. We're absolutely confident we can continue to deliver our programme. We have received reassurance from the European Union that those contracts won't be disrupted. But now I think we need to move forward, work together with our counterparts across this world, rather than putting in restrictions and protectionism, which ultimately will only damage citizens all over the world.
You say there that you've had reassurances from the EU that our vaccine supply won't be affected. But this really matters, doesn't it? Because a lot of people will be looking at this and they will be alarmed about whether or not the vaccines that they have already been given, the Pfizer one in particular, if they'll be able to get a second dose, if the vaccines in the UK will be impacted. Exactly what reassurances have you been given on that?
Well, the Prime Minister has spoken to Ursula von der Leyen. She has been very clear that those contractual supplies won't be disrupted. That's a very important assurance. Of course, we also have our UK-produced vaccines as well. And, if you look at our vaccine pipeline, 367 million doses, we have a significant supply to be able to vaccinate the UK population.
On Pfizer specifically, can you guarantee that everyone who's had the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine will get their second dose? They won't be given another vaccine?
We can absolutely guarantee our programme of delivery of the vaccine. And we have received assurances from the EU about the supply under contract of all of those vaccines.
OK. Now, you've talked a lot about the fact that you resist protectionism on the vaccines. Michael Gove said yesterday that our first priority is vaccinating people in the United Kingdom, but we also want to work with our friends and neighbours in the European Union in order to help them as well. I mean, that all sounds quite noble, but what does it mean? Does that mean that once we've vaccinated the most vulnerable in the UK, we might look at giving vaccines to other countries?
The UK has led in terms of things like the COVAX programme. We've created the Oxford vaccine, which is a relatively low-cost, easy-to-deploy vaccine.
But could we give vaccine supplies to other European countries?
Well, of course, we first need to make sure that our population is vaccinated. We have a target to get the most vulnerable vaccinated by mid-February. It's a bit too early to say about how we would deploy XX vaccine, but we certainly want to work with friends and neighbours. We want to work with developing countries because we're only going to solve this issue once everybody in the world is vaccinated. And we're also working to keep trade flowing, which is really important, keep tariffs low or eliminated on medical goods and supplies so that we can make sure that all the world benefits from the expertise here in the United Kingdom.
I think everyone could understand that, if we have an oversupply of vaccine, then it does make sense to help other countries who may not have the same amount. But at what point does that happen? Does that happen once we've vaccinated all the vulnerable by mid-February, as we hope? Does it happen when we've vaccinated all the over 50s, the entire population? When do we start thinking about that?
I mean, we're sticking by our vaccination timetable, which is, of course, making sure the most vulnerable are vaccinated by mid-February, that we complete the first 9 groups by the spring and all adults by the autumn. So that programme will happen. And of course,
it won't be till the autumn then, realistically?
Look, some of these supplies, there have been supply issues. So we need to make sure that the new drugs that are coming online are delivered. The population is vaccinated. But of course, as we're developing that, we are also working with other countries about how we can help. Because this, it won't benefit people in Britain if we become a vaccinated island and many other countries don't have the vaccine, because the virus will continue to spread. So we need to tackle this on a global basis.
Who would we prioritise at that point? Would we prioritise some of our closest neighbours and allies, places like Ireland, for example, or would we prioritise developing countries many of them who've not vaccinated anybody so far?
Well, the UK's presidency of the G7 this year is a vital opportunity for us to lead on this, to work with our G7 partners, but also work with developing nations who need the vaccine to make sure their populations are protected as well. And I don't think it's an either or. Capacity is being ramped up across the world in terms of these vaccine production. And I think by working together, we can deal with this problem much better than by working alone and putting up unnecessary restrictions.
OK. The government had a target to vaccinate give a first vaccine dose to all care home residents and staff by the end of January. I mean, today's the 31st. So has that target been met?
We have vaccinated over 8 million people. I'm sure we'll have the full report by the end of today, but we're certainly on track to make sure we hit that target.
But specifically on care homes, are we on track to have met the target to have vaccinated all residents and staff in care homes by the end of today?
We are on track, but we'll get the full report, Sophie. Once today is over, we'll be able to report next week, and the Health Secretary will give an update in the House.
So we're not sure yet? We haven't got the full data through, is that what you're saying?
Well, of course we haven't, because it's the 31st, but as I say, the Health Secretary will give an update to the House, and I'm sure there will be positive news. OK, sounds quite confident in that case.
I just want to talk to you about a report in the Sunday Telegraph this morning. They're saying that SPI-M, which is this subgroup of SAGE, the scientists who advise the government, has said that social distancing could be in place for the rest of the year unless vaccines are 85% effective in reducing transmission. Now, that's a pretty tall order. Is that realistic? Is that right, that actually we could be looking at social distancing measures for the rest of the year?
What we're doing is we're putting our shoulders to the wheel, making sure we get these vaccines rolled out. It's very important when people do get the call that they take up the vaccine offer. What we want to do is start opening up things as soon as we are able to, whilst at the same time protecting lives. And the Prime Minister has said that all going well, we'll be able to open up our schools from the 8th of March. I don't want to make predictions about the situation in the autumn. I think it's far too far away, but we have to take this on a step-by-step basis, opening up as we're able, making sure the most vulnerable are protected. And that's the way to deal with this issue. I think long-term predictions in what is a very, very unpredictable situation are not wise.
Is that SPI-M report correct, though?
Well, I mean, it's a long-term prediction. And what I've just said is we need to take this on a week-by-week basis as we monitor what happens to the disease. And the way to solve this is through global cooperation. It's through making sure that we roll out the vaccine programme in the way we have been doing. It's making sure people are complying with the rules, and that's what will help us get through this. I think speculating about what's going to happen in the autumn is far too far away.
Of course, one of the reasons we can't predict how things are going to go is because we don't know what's going to happen with new variants, how they're going to react to the vaccine and how they're going to react to the population as well. So how many cases of the South African variant and the Brazilian variant are currently in the UK?
Well, I don't have figures for how many variants are in the UK. What we do know is the vaccines that we have either deployed or are on order are doing a good job of dealing with those variants. And we have some very highly qualified scientists and doctors making sure that our vaccine programme is not just dealing with the original variant of COVID, but also looking at the future variants and making sure we are fully protected. But I think it's unwise for politicians to try and speculate on the details of variants in the same way as the future predictions of the outbreak of the disease.
It's difficult though, isn't it? You admit that you don't know exactly how many cases of these variants are in the United Kingdom. You say that, of course, there is some encouraging news on the vaccine efficacy against them, but with many of the vaccines, there are, frankly, pretty mixed results on it. Do you think we're going to look back and think that not being tougher on our borders was one of the biggest mistakes this government made? If I look, for example, Jeremy Hunt called for international travel to be stopped on the 4th of January. We'll hear from him a bit later. At that point, there was no known cases of the Brazilian variant in the UK. There are now 3 times, according to Matt Hancock, as many cases of the South African variant. Why did we not act tougher sooner on borders?
We have been very tough on the borders. If you remember last year, we put in place the travel corridors. We've banned travel from particular countries. We put in a pre-travel testing regime. We've tightened things up further.
Well, travel corridors aren't tough, are they? They're saying that you can travel to the UK from other countries.
But in every case, Sophie, we are facing a choice of how do we deal with a virus that is changing.
So was that choice wrong on travel and border control?
We need to protect lives and protect livelihoods and recognise that the UK is an open economy. You know, look at the situation we had with France at the end of December when we, had truckers who had to be tested for COVID. You know, we have fresh fruit and vegetables coming in with truckers and trucks. So we need to make sure that we are protecting our borders, but at the same time, we do need to make sure that the economy can continue to run and fresh supplies can be delivered to the United Kingdom. So there is
you
always
can exempt freight, though, can't you? You can exempt freight, and
there's always a balance to be struck, and you cannot hermetically seal the UK borders. That is not practical. I think what we have taken is the right measures at the right time to ensure we are dealing with the way the virus has developed. One
of the big sacrifices, of course, has been on schools, closing schools. I can't help thinking as well about the big sacrifice so many of our young people have made in the last year. They've had their education so terribly disrupted. They haven't been able to see their friends. Very difficult, of course, for young people, for teenagers as well. All this, of course, for a virus where the likelihood is that they'll only suffer very mild symptoms. Has the government really done enough to help what could be a real mental health crisis and an education crisis in our young people? I mean, look, I know how difficult this is. I have 2 teenage children at home who have been, on Zoom classes for the last few months, and it's tough for them, it's tough for parents. We all want our children to be able to go back to school, to enjoy socialising with their friends again, to get the in-classroom teaching, which is so important to education. But ultimately, this is an issue of life and death. The school transmission in the community was resulting in a spike in coronavirus cases and leading to deaths. So this has been a very, very difficult situation. What we can do is make sure the vaccine rollout programme is working as fast as possible, make sure that we are complying with all the rules so that we can get those schools back on March the 8th. I think it's incredibly important. We're obviously doing a lot of work to make sure that children are able to catch up, that parents have the right support as we leave the lockdown and as we recover the economy after coronavirus. But, it is really, really tough. And I think we're all feeling it, Sophie. Some people are saying that we should move teachers up the vaccination priority list to try and get schools to reopen. That's what Tony Blair told me yesterday. We'll hear from him in a moment. He says it might only take a couple of days to vaccinate teachers. Is that something that should be considered?
Well, the issue is that for every person you vaccinate who isn't in the most vulnerable group, that's somebody in the most vulnerable group who isn't getting their vaccine and who is more likely to die in the next few weeks and months. And I just don't think that's right. And that is the decision made by the independent committee that we are going to vaccinate first the over 70s and those in the most vulnerable group, and then the over 50s. And I think it's right that we do have an independent committee that looks at the priorities. Of course, we want everybody to be vaccinated. Of course, we want the schools to be open, but we face a really difficult choice. And the most important thing is protecting lives. And that is why we've had to do the vaccine priorities in the way we had. And, people are working night and day, our fantastic health service, the vaccine task force are working night and day to get this programme. So we are maximising, the amount of vaccines we get out. There isn't spare capacity to vaccinate other people. And we do have to prioritise those who are most vulnerable to dying. That is the stark truth we face.
Keen, of course, to talk to you about things other than COVID as we come to the end of the interview. You're announcing today that we're going to be joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is this trade bloc with countries like Australia, Japan, Mexico. Have you done an assessment of how much this will boost our GDP?
Well, this is a really fast-growing group of countries. So some countries like Mexico, Malaysia, they're rapidly rising up the global league tables. And what we want to do is hitch Britain to those fast-growing economies. We'll see reduced tariffs from things like whiskey, cars, computer games, technology, and that will enable British business to export more to those countries. And unlike the EU, there aren't the strings attached. So we wouldn't have a court making judgments. We wouldn't have any control over our borders lost. We wouldn't be paying any money in. So this is all about lowering those barriers so that we can get more of our fantastic British products into those fast-growing markets. So, for example, in Malaysia, currently they're paying over 100% tariffs on whiskey. If we could get those tariffs reduced, it means more exports, more opportunities for the Scotch industry in Scotland. These things are always difficult to assess. We will produce a scoping study when we start the formal negotiations, which is likely to be later on in the spring. But fundamentally, what it is about is lowering barriers to opportunities for British business.
Without wanting to diminish the importance of signing up to these partnerships or trade deals, any assessment is likely to pale in comparison to the GDP that we lost after leaving the single market, after leaving the European Union, isn't it? I mean, the OBR estimates, for example, that a standard trade deal like the one that we negotiated would reduce our GDP by around 4% compared to the previous relationship.
Well, I don't accept the premise of that question, because all of the scenarios, the UK economy is growing. And we have secured now a Brexit deal which is tariff-free. Well, we've secured a Brexit deal that is tariff-free and quota-free. So now we've got the best of both worlds. We can trade freely with the European Union and trade freely with these fast-growing parts of the world. And if you add up CPTPP and the United States, that's 40% of global GDP. That is a huge market for us to go after. We're the second largest services exporter.
We haven't got a trade deal with the United States yet, have we?
Well, we're working on that as well, Sophie. Those are both in the pipeline. But my point is there are these huge opportunities out there, and those markets are growing faster than the EU market. So we need to think about, where do we want Britain to be in 2030? Where do we want us to be in 2050, when digital trade is much more important, when British products like financial services and robotics will be in huge demand across the world? So what I am doing is laying that groundwork for our future economic opportunities.
OK. Liz Truss, thank you very much for coming on the programme this morning. Good to talk.
Thank you.